Chapter 1. The Little Prince. Once upon a time a prince was born. He was the most beautiful baby ever. His eyes looked curious, even though he was just a newborn. His nose was small but nice, and his skin was a healthy color. He was round and fat, with straight arms and legs. The king and queen of No Man's Land were very happy. They had waited 10 years for this baby. The king had a brother who was not very happy. This brother would have become king if the baby had not been born. But the king was kind to his brother. He gave him a big dukedom. The brother tried to be happy too. The prince's christening was a big event. In their country, the prince had 24 godfathers and godmothers. Each one gave him a name and promised to help him. When he grew up, the prince would choose his favorite name and godparent. Everyone was excited. Rich people gave money to make the poor people happy. There were dinners for working men, tea parties for their wives, and milk and buns for the children. The palace was very busy with preparations. The queen stayed in her room, even though the prince was 6 weeks old. She was pale and quiet, but nobody thought she was sick. Everyone was focused on the baby. On the christening day, the palace was full of people in fancy clothes. Even the kitchen maid wore a new pink dress. Everyone thought they looked lovely. At 6 in the morning, everyone was dressed. The prince wore a magnificent robe. He did not like it and cried a lot. The queen admired her baby. She kissed him and wished for a nice christening. Then she lay back in bed. She was always calm and never complained. Her name was Dolores. The christening ceremony was grand. Important people from other countries came. The godparents gave their names to the prince. Then 6 heralds shouted the names. Afterward, the names were written in the state records. After the ceremony, the baby prince was almost smothered by his robes. Few knew, but he had down some stairs. His nurse, a fancy young lady, had dropped him while fixing her dress. The baby was pale, but did not cry. Nobody noticed, because the silver trumpets were loud. As the procession continued, the baby was carried under a white satin canopy. It was a beautiful sight. 2 little girls in white dresses whispered that the prince needed a fairy godmother. Suddenly, a small old woman in gray appeared. She said she was the prince's godmother. The nurse was angry and said the baby was the prince, not just a baby. The old woman insisted she must kiss the baby. She did, and nobody could stop her. She said the baby should be called Prince Dolor, after his mother Dolores. Everyone was shocked. The queen's name was only used after death. The gold stick in waiting tried to hit the old woman, but she disappeared. Then the palace bell tolled. The queen was dead. In the middle of the night, the prince's nurse saw something in the doorway. It was the old woman with gray eyes. She screamed, and the old woman was gone. Everyone was kind to the little prince. People are usually kind to children without mothers. The prince had a nice nursery and many attendants. They treated him with respect. No one talked to him in baby language or kissed him. Some people secretly kissed him because he was so sweet. The prince did not miss his mother because he was too young, but after she died, things went wrong. He became sickly and pale. His legs stopped growing. They withered and shrank. He could not stand or walk. People started talking about it. A prince who cannot stand is a big problem. It was sad for the prince too, but people did not think of that. When he grew older, he looked healthy and bright, but his legs were still weak. People spoke about him in whispers. They knew something was wrong with the prince. The king, his father, did not know. The king was busy with the kingdom and did not spend much time with his son. He missed the queen. After she died, he stayed in her rooms. He looked at the beautiful mountains from her window, hoping she would come back. The king decided to call the prince Dolor, after his mother, Dolores. Every week, the prince visited the king. One day, the king noticed something was wrong. The prince was playing, dragging himself with his arms. The king asked the nurse about his age. She said, 2 years, 3 months, and 5 days. The king sighed and asked the crown prince if something was wrong. The crown prince said it was just a slight problem with the spine and would improve. The king was sad. He held out his arms to the prince. The prince wriggled on the floor to reach him. The king was upset and ordered all the doctors to come. The doctors gave different opinions. They said the prince must have been hurt as a baby, but nobody remembered. The country nurse finally said the baby had fallen on the day of the christening. The other nurses scolded her. The nurse was sent away to the beautiful mountains. The king did not interfere much after learning his son could not walk. He avoided painful things. The crown prince suggested leaving the prince to nature. Nature helped. The prince's body was strong, and his face was sweet, like his mother's. The king sometimes watched the prince with sadness. The prince learned to crawl and swing himself with his arms. He was active in his own way. The king asked the crown prince to take care of the prince if anything happened to him. The crown prince promised. Soon after, the king died suddenly. The prince was left without parents. The people were sad but moved on quickly. The prince became king, but the crown prince ruled as regent. The prince was too young. The crown prince and his sons made the country lively with entertainments. The regent and his sons were popular. The prince was seen rarely. He played in the palace garden, carried by a footman or left on the grass. He had a bright, intelligent face and thoughtful eyes. People loved him. The regent felt uncomfortable. The regent suggested sending the prince to the beautiful mountains for his health. The council agreed. The prince left with a guard of soldiers. But soon news came that the prince had died on the way. The nurse and doctor said he fell ill and died. His coffin was brought back, and he was buried with his parents. The country mourned and then forgot him. The regent became king. He ruled with dignity, but there is no evidence that he enjoyed it. Chapter 3. And what about the little lame prince? Everyone seemed to forget him, but not everyone. Some kind mothers and palace servants remembered him. They said, "Poor Prince Dolor." They thought he might be happier where he was. The truth was, beyond the mountains there was a flat, empty land. It had no trees or bushes, just grass and a few flowers. It was very hot in summer and very cold in winter. No one lived there. In the middle of this land stood a tall tower. It was very strong, with no doors and few windows, only near the top. It was about 100 feet high. The tower looked empty, but it wasn't. Inside, near the top, was a small house with 4 rooms. It had a kitchen, a bedroom for the nurse, a parlor, and a room for a child. This child was Prince Dolor. One winter night, a man on a big black horse came to the tower. He carried a woman and a child. The woman was sad and angry. She was a criminal, but she was not going to die. Instead, she had to live in the tower with the child. She could live as long as the child lived. This was to make sure she took good care of him. The child was Prince Dolor. He was a gentle boy with a sweet smile. He could not stand or run because his legs were small and weak. The man helped the woman and child into the tower. They never came down again. Every month, the man returned with food and supplies. He made sure the prince was alive and well. Prince Dolor had everything he needed. He was happy because he did not know what he was missing. His nurse was kind to him, even though she was a criminal. She took good care of him. Prince Dolor spent his time playing and learning. He crawled and jumped around like a puppy. He loved to look out the windows and watch the sky and the land below. He read many books and learned about the world. As he grew older, Prince Dolor began to feel sad. He wanted to see the world he read about in his books. He longed for a friend. One day, while he was sitting and feeling sad, he heard a tap, tap, tap. He turned around and saw a little old woman. She was not scary, but very curious. She had gray hair and a gray dress. She smiled sweetly and spoke softly. "My dear little boy," she said, "I could not come to you until you wanted me. But now you do want me, and here I am." Prince Dolor was polite and asked, "Who are you? Are you my mother?" The old woman smiled sadly and said, "No, but your mother was my friend. I am your godmother." Prince Dolor was happy. He asked if she could stay and play with him. They played and talked together. "Are you happy here?" the godmother asked. "Yes," said Prince Dolor, "but I wish I had a friend to play with." The godmother looked sad. "I cannot give you a friend, but I can help you." "Thank you," said Prince Dolor. "But why do you say I need help?" The godmother looked at his legs and his face. She said, "Kiss me." Prince Dolor asked, "What is kissing?" The godmother hugged and kissed him. He kissed her back. "You are better than my kitten," he said. "Promise me you will never go away." "I must go, but I will leave you a gift," she said. "A traveling cloak." Prince Dolor did not understand. "I never go out. Why do I need a cloak?" "It is a special cloak," said the godmother. "It will take you wherever you want to go." Just then, they heard a heavy step and a grumpy voice. It was the nurse bringing dinner. Prince Dolor was worried. "Will you go away, godmother?" he asked. "Maybe, but only for a little while. Wish for me, and I will come back," she said. Prince Dolor was uneasy. He did not know what would happen when the nurse saw his godmother. But he trusted her and knew she would come back. Chapter 4. Prince Dolor received a special cloak from his godmother. It looked old and small. When he touched it, it became tiny. He hid it in his pocket to keep it secret from his nurse. Later, Prince Dolor took out the cloak. It was just a piece of cloth, dark green and shabby. It had a hole in the center for his neck. It looked like a poncho. He felt sad because it was so shabby. He wondered why his godmother gave it to him. He put the cloak away in his cupboard. He did not want his nurse to see it. After a while, he forgot about the cloak. He almost forgot about his godmother, too. One day, Prince Dolor became very ill. He felt very sad and lonely. He wished his godmother would come back. He missed her very much. One night, Prince Dolor felt a kiss on his neck. He turned around and saw his godmother. He was very happy to see her. He hugged her and kissed her. She asked him about the cloak. Prince Dolor said he had put it away. She told him to get it. He took it out of the cupboard. She told him how to use it. He had to sit in the middle, open the skylight, and say, "Abracadabra, dum dum dum." Prince Dolor thought it was silly, but he trusted his godmother. She laughed and said, "Abracadabra, dum dum dum." Then she disappeared. Prince Dolor felt better. He looked for his cloak but could not find it. His nurse had cleaned his room and thrown away his toys. Prince Dolor was very sad. He cried quietly so his nurse would not hear him. Then he heard a laugh. He saw the cloak in the corner of his room. He picked it up and hugged it. He unrolled it and wondered what would happen next. Chapter 5. If you wonder if there is a hidden meaning in this story, there is. But I have hidden it well. You can read it like a simple fairy tale. Let's return to Prince Dolor, the little lame boy. He was untying his wonderful cloak, which was very tight. He used his small hands and was very determined. His eyes were shining with excitement. When we see people suffering, we feel sorry for them. But when they bravely face their problems, we respect them. We can admire even a little child. When Prince Dolor untied all the knots, something amazing happened. The cloak unfolded itself. It laid flat on the carpet. Then it grew larger and became like a boat. The prince watched it with some worry. But he was brave. He knew his godmother would never give him anything harmful. So, he jumped into the middle of the cloak. At first, nothing happened. Then he remembered the magic words. He said, "Abracadabra, dum dum dum." And then the cloak started to rise. It went higher and higher, almost touching the skylight. Prince Dolor was a little scared. He remembered his godmother's command, "Open the skylight." He opened the skylight, and the cloak sailed out into the fresh air. Prince Dolor felt a wonderful sensation. He saw the sky and the earth below. He felt free and happy. There was nothing but earth and sky. No houses, trees, rivers, or mountains. But to him, it was beautiful. The sky was blue, and the evening breeze was sweet. He saw a few stars and a small moon. But soon the breeze became cold. Prince Dolor started to shiver. He wanted to go home, but forgot the magic words. The cloak kept flying faster and faster. He felt scared and called out to his godmother for help. The right words came to his mind. "Abracadabra, tum tum tea." The cloak turned and started flying back to the tower. He reached the skylight and slipped in quietly. His nurse came in, not knowing where he had been. The cloak folded itself into a small parcel and hid in a corner. The nurse didn't see it. She brought his supper, but Prince Dolor was thinking about his cloak. That night, he lay in bed and thought about traveling the world on his cloak. The next day, he did his lessons quickly. Then he opened the skylight, said the magic words, and was off again. His godmother made an image of him reading, so his nurse wouldn't notice he was gone. Prince Dolor floated in the air, seeing many wonderful things. He saw tiny flowers and wished he had glasses to see them better. Suddenly, he had a pair of gold spectacles. He could see every blade of grass and tiny flower. He looked up at the sky and saw a line of birds flying. They were passage birds. He wished he could see where they were going. The cloak moved him closer to the birds. He watched the swallows flying and wished he could travel with them. He wanted to see the world, but the swallows kept flying on their path. Feeling sad and lonely, he decided to go home. He said the magic words and went back to his tower. He spent 3 days feeling unhappy, even though he had his wonderful cloak. Chapter 6. Prince Dolor felt happy. He got new books. He liked books a lot. The king sent him toys too. But Prince Dolor did not care about toys now. He said, "I am a big boy." He did not want to play with the rocking horse. The rocking horse was fun when he was little. Now he wanted something more. Prince Dolor looked at the big black horse. It was a beautiful horse. He thought it would be nice to ride it. If I were a knight, I would see the world, he thought. He imagined riding the horse fast. He imagined seeing new places. He read all his new books. The books told him about knights and adventures. He wanted to know what it felt like to ride a horse. He wished to see the world. "I will try," he said. His godmother always let him try hard before he got anything. She wanted him to learn and grow. This day, the knots on his traveling cloak were hard to untie. But soon he was in the open air. He floated over the tower. The air felt fresh and cool. Before, he always stayed near home. But now he felt tired of the tower. "Let's go," he said. The cloak moved fast, like a train. The wind rushed past him. He felt free and excited. "This is like riding a race," he said. He felt happy. He loved the speed and the wind. But soon, he was cold and hungry. Then it started to rain. He got very wet. The rain was cold and heavy. "Should I go back?" he thought. But he said, "No, I must see the world." Suddenly he felt warm. A bearskin covered him. It was soft and warm. He found food in his pocket. It was the best food he ever tasted. He ate slowly, enjoying each bite. He drank rainwater. It was fresh and good. The sun came out and dried him. He felt warm and fell asleep. The sun was bright and kind. When he woke up, he saw a beautiful land. It had a river, trees, and fields. The fields were green and full of flowers. He watched the river and trees. He thought they were wonderful. He loved the colors and the sounds. He wanted to see animals. The cloak took him to a valley. He saw cows, horses, sheep, pigs, and birds. The birds sang sweet songs. He listened to the sounds. He was very happy. The animals were peaceful and friendly. He wanted to see a boy like him. He asked his godmother. The cloak took him to a shepherd boy. The boy was strong and happy. Prince Dolor wanted to play with him, but the cloak did not go down. The boy did not see him. He ran and played with his dog. The dog was lively and fun. Prince Dolor watched him. He felt sad and lonely. He wished he could join the boy, but he knew he could not. He was different. But he still felt happy to see the boy play. It made him smile. Chapter 7. Prince Dolor thought about kings. He did not know much about kings. He was once a king himself. His nurse was not allowed to tell him anything. She kept secrets about his past. Sometimes Prince Dolor thought about his parents. Were they like other parents? He did not know them. Because he knew nothing, he did not miss them. Reading stories about children and their mothers made him feel lonely. It made him sad. He learned about kings and princes in his lessons. He did not understand everything. Still, he thought about it a lot. His nurse did not like his questions. She gave sharp answers. This made him think even more. After his last painful journey with the traveling cloak, he did not want to see the world anymore. He was happy reading books. He loved listening to his little lark. The lark sang for him every day. During winter, the lark's song made him happy. He did not need anything else, not even his traveling cloak, which stayed unused in a corner. His godmother did not visit him. It seemed she had given him gifts and left. He had to use them as he wished. When children grow up, they must make choices on their own. Prince Dolor was now a big boy. He was not tall. His legs were weak and small, but he had strong arms and shoulders. He was handsome. He looked like his mother. He was a smart boy. He loved to learn. He worked hard at his lessons. He never gave up until he understood everything. One day, he asked his nurse a question. "Will I ever be a king?" The nurse was shocked. She had forgotten about her crime. She had forgotten her punishment. She almost loved the prince now. She felt sorry for him. The nurse thought about the truth. Should she tell Prince Dolor? After much thinking, she decided to write it down. She wrote on his slate, "You are a king." Prince Dolor was surprised. He was excited. He felt like a real king. The nurse quickly wrote his history. She wrote about his parents. She wrote how they died. She wrote how his uncle took the throne. She wrote how he ended up in the tower. The prince felt sorry for the nurse. He decided to help her and himself. He wanted to go out into the world. He wanted to fight for his rights. He barely slept that night. The next morning, he dressed himself. This was hard for him. He usually depended on his nurse. He wanted to be independent like a real king. He untied his traveling cloak. He set off. As he flew, he said goodbye to his lark. He asked his godmother to guide him. The cloak flew fast. It went over mountains. It went over forests. It went over lakes. Prince Dolor was scared. He stayed quiet. He waited for what would happen. After some time, he heard a noise. It was like a giant hive of bees. He looked down. He saw a big city. It was beautiful. It was busy. But he did not understand it. He wished he had someone to talk to. A magpie appeared. The magpie offered to talk. She knew a lot. She loved to talk. The magpie explained everything she saw. Prince Dolor listened carefully. Prince Dolor noticed people. Some were happy. They were busy. Others were sad. They were miserable. He wondered if the world could be fair. He thought he would try to make it fair. If he were a king, the magpie showed him the royal palace. It was huge. It was beautiful. It had many rooms. It had gardens. There was one small room. It had a view of the beautiful mountains, but it had been closed since the queen died. Prince Dolor wanted to see the king. Chapter 8. What is fun? A revolution. The magpie thought it was fun, but it was not fun. It was scary. It was bad. The big bell rang. Guns fired. The people knew they had no king. They came together in big groups. They talked loudly. Sometimes they shouted. Sometimes they roared. Prince Dolor heard them. He floated in the air. He listened. He heard many cries. Long live the king! The king is dead. Down with the king. Down with the crown. Hurrah for the republic. Hurrah for no government. The cries went up to the sky. The scene below changed. Revolutions happen. They happen when bad kings make people bad too. They happen when bad rulers hurt people. They happen when people want change. I hope you never see a revolution. I hope I never see one too. Revolutions are very bad. Soldiers shoot people. Scaffolds are built. Heads fall off. Houses burn. Women and children are hurt. It is very sad. It is very evil. Prince Dolor saw all this. It happened so fast. He was very confused. "Oh, let me go home," he cried. He covered his ears. He shut his eyes. "Let me go home," he said. His lonely tower felt like home. It felt safe. "Goodbye, then," said the magpie. She flapped her wings. She had talked all day and all night. Prince Dolor floated over the city for a long time. He did not eat. He did not sleep. He watched the terrible things below. "You have seen enough of the world?" asked the magpie. "Oh, I have," cried the prince. He shivered. "Until next time." "All right, Your Highness. You don't know me, but I know you. We may meet again." The magpie looked at him. Her eyes were sharp. They looked like his godmother's eyes. But then she became a bird again. She screeched and flew away. Prince Dolor saw his uncle. The magpie said, "He is dead." The prince felt sorry for him. The king looked peaceful. This was death. Even kings die. Well, he had a hard life. Maybe he is glad it is over. "Goodbye, Your Majesty," said the magpie. The prince's first and last sight of his uncle was over. He sat on his cloak. He was silent. He was thoughtful. "What shall we do now?" asked the magpie. "There is nothing more to do with him, except a big funeral. I will go and see it. All the world will see it. He was important when he was alive. He should be important now he is dead. Just once more. He is better dead than alive. If we get someone in his place. There will be noise in the city. Let's float up and see it, at a safe distance. It will be fun." Chapter 9. When Prince Dolor woke up, he was alone. His nurse was gone. Usually she would wake him up and tidy the room. But today, the room was dusty, and nobody was there to tell him to get up. He liked to stay in bed and think. He thought about how two little men stayed in bed until the clock struck 10. Now it was 10 o'clock, and still no nurse. At first, he was glad to be alone because he felt tired. But when he realized he had slept in his clothes, he felt uncomfortable and a little scared. He called for his nurse, but nobody answered. He started to cry, but then he decided that crying was for babies. He got out of bed and crawled on his knees to each room. All the rooms were empty. Everything was neat, and the food was ready. But there was nobody else in the tower. Prince Dolor felt very lonely. He had never been completely alone before. He sat on the floor and thought about what to do. He felt like giving up, but then he remembered a saying his nurse had taught him. For every evil under the sun, there is a remedy, or there's none. If there is one, try to find it. If there isn't, never mind it. He wondered if there was a remedy for his situation. He looked out the window and saw the marks of a horse's feet. The deaf-mute had come and taken his nurse away. He felt sad and angry, but he decided to be brave and try to help himself. He tried to dress himself and do all the chores. He even swept the hearth and put on more coals. He remembered his godmother's words that princes should not mind doing anything. He thought of his godmother. He missed her, but decided to help himself. He felt like he had grown up a lot in the past few days. For 5 days, Prince Dolor lived alone in the tower. He did everything for himself and enjoyed it until bedtime. Then he felt lonely. On the 6th day, he ran out of food. He couldn't get out of the tower. He thought he would die, but he tried to be brave. He gathered his favorite things around him and waited. He wished he could have done something important before he died. Then he heard a trumpet. It was loud and bold. He remembered many things and felt strong. The deaf-mute had taken the nurse away to tell the people about Prince Dolor. They told everyone that he was alive and should be the king. The people wanted a new king, and they chose Prince Dolor. A group of lords, gentlemen, and soldiers came to the tower to get him. They found him pale but brave. They knelt before him and offered him the crown. Prince Dolor agreed to be the king. He felt a glow and dignity that made him look like a king. He remembered that he was only a little boy, but the lords told him he was 15 years old. He thought about his birthday and how he was a king now. He felt sad to leave his old life, but was ready for the new one. He wished to see his godmother one more time. As he lay down, the sun shone, and his godmother appeared. She looked beautiful. Prince Dolor was happy to see her. He hugged her and asked her to stay with him. She promised never to forsake him. She told him to open a special room in the palace where they could talk about his mother. Then the trumpets and shouts grew louder. The godmother disappeared, and the prince was left alone. Prince Dolor left the tower as the king of no man's land. He took only one small thing with him, his traveling cloak. Chapter 10. Did Prince Dolor become a great king? Was he like a father to his people? Did he have a long and happy reign? What important things happened during his rule in no man's land? To answer all these questions, I would have to write another book. And I'm tired, children, tired. As grown-up people sometimes are, though not always with play. Besides, I have a small person belonging to me who loves to listen to the story but grumbles much at the writing of it. She has been running around the house clapping her hands with joy when I told her it was nearly finished. But that is neither here nor there. I have told you the story of Prince Dolor, but I do not know the full history of No Man's Land. If anybody knows it, perhaps they will write it down in another book. But my story is done. However, I am sure that Prince Dolor made an excellent king. Nobody does anything less well, not even the simplest daily task, for having such a godmother as the little old woman in gray. Nor is anyone less good or capable of work and enjoyment in later life, for having been a little unhappy in youth, as the prince had been. I cannot say he was always happy. Who is? Or that he had no cares. Everyone has some cares. But when people bothered him with state etiquette, state squabbles, and the like, he would go to that upper room looking out on the beautiful mountains. There, laying his head on his godmother's shoulder, he would become calm and at peace. She helped him with any difficulties that came up. She was very wise. When the people of No Man's Land complained and said, "Unhappy is the nation whose king is a child," she would tell him, "You are a child. Accept it. Be humble. Be teachable. Learn from others until you gain your own wisdom." He did so. He learned to take advice before giving it and to obey before he could command rightly. He gathered all the good and wise people of his kingdom and asked for their opinions on all affairs until he could form his own. He did this sooner than anyone would have guessed if they didn't know about his godmother and his traveling cloak. Two secret blessings that many guessed at, but nobody fully understood. They didn't understand why he loved the little upper room, except that it had been his mother's room. People remembered now that she had sat for hours watching the beautiful mountains from that window. He used his traveling cloak, but not often. As he grew older, the work of ruling the kingdom prevented him from using it frequently. When he did use it, it was more to see or investigate something for the good of the country rather than for his own pleasure. He prized his godmother's gift as dearly as ever. It comforted him in all his troubles and enhanced all his joys. It made him almost forget his lameness, which was never cured. The cruel things that had been feared for him did not happen. His misfortune was not so bad after all. It proved to be much less inconvenient, even to himself, than had been feared. A council of surgeons and mechanicians invented a wonderful pair of crutches for him. With their help, he managed to walk independently, though not easily or gracefully. His people loved him so much that they never heard the sound of his crutches on the palace floors without a leap of the heart. They knew that good was coming to them whenever he approached. Though he never walked in processions or reviewed his troops on a magnificent horse, he managed all the duties and many of the pleasures of his rank. When he held his levees, not standing but seated on a throne that hid his infirmity, the people thronged to greet him. When he drove through the city streets, shouts followed him wherever he went, and every face brightened as he passed. His own face was perhaps the brightest of all. First, because he accepted his affliction patiently. Second, because he was brave and tried to forget himself, living for other people. His subjects loved him so well that hundreds of them might have been ready to die for their poor, lame king. He never married. When his people asked him to choose a queen, he replied that his country was his bride, and he desired no other. But perhaps the real reason was that he feared change. No wife in the world would have been as perfect, lovable, and tender to him in all his weaknesses as his beautiful old godmother. His 24 other godparents, or as many of them as were still alive, gathered around him as soon as he became king. He was very polite to them all, but did not adopt any of the names they had given him. He kept the name he had always known, though it had now almost lost its meaning, for King Dolor was one of the happiest and cheerfulest men alive. He did many things that surprised his subjects. First, he pardoned the woman who had been his nurse and stopped the punishment of death in no man's land. All capital criminals were sent to perpetual imprisonment in Hopeless Tower and the plain around it, where they could do no harm and might do a little good, as the woman had done. He also brought back his uncle's family, who had fled in fear to another country, and restored them to their honors. By and by, he chose the eldest son of his eldest cousin, who had died a year ago, and had him educated in the royal palace as the heir to the throne. This young prince was quiet and unobtrusive, so everyone wondered why the king chose him. But as he grew into a fine young man, good and brave, they agreed that the king judged wisely. One cannot make oneself, but one can sometimes help in making somebody else, the king said one day, watching the young prince affectionately. He was the best runner, highest leaper, and keenest sportsman in the country. It is well. He said this to a good old woman, his first nurse, whom he had found in her cottage among the beautiful mountains. He sent for her to visit him once a year and treated her with great honor until she died. He was equally kind, though less tender, to his other nurse. After receiving her pardon, she returned to her native town and became a great lady. I hope she was a good one, but as she was so grand now, any little faults she had did not show. King Dolor's reign was long and prosperous. Whether he was happy is a question no human being can decide. But I think he was because he made everyone around him happy. Also, because he was his godmother's godson, he could visit her in that quiet little room with a view of the beautiful mountains whenever he liked. They were always there, unchanged, though the city lay so low. And I think he would have sooner lost his crown than lost sight of the beautiful mountains. In time, when the young prince was grown into a capable young man, the king did something extraordinary. He announced that he wished to invest his heir with the royal purple while he went on a distant journey he had long desired to take. Everyone marveled, but nobody opposed him. The nation admired the young regent and perhaps looked forward to the change. On the day of the ceremony, the people gathered in the great square to see the young prince take on his new duties. He was a fine young man, tall and straight with a handsome face. Some thought he was handsomer than the king, but others thought differently. However, as the king sat on his throne with gray hair and a few wrinkles, there was something about his face that made the people regard him with a mix of tenderness and awe. He lifted his thin, slender hand, and the crowd fell silent. He spoke simply and clearly, like the first song of a bird in the morning. "My people, I am tired. I want to rest. I have had a long reign and done much work, as much as I could. Many might have done it better, but none with a better will. Now I leave it to others. I am tired, very tired. Let me go home." There was a murmur from the crowd, then silence again. "I am not worried about you, my people. You are prosperous and at peace. I leave you in good hands. The Prince Regent will be a better king for you than I." "No, no, no," shouted the crowd. But he seemed not to hear them. "Yes, yes," he said firmly. "It is time for me to go. Remember me sometimes, for I have loved you well, and I am going on a long journey, and I do not think I will come back." He took out a small bundle from his pocket, tied with many knots that untied themselves in an instant. With a joyful look, he muttered a few words. Then, suddenly, the king was floating in the air on something safe and pleasant. After him sprang a little lark, singing louder and clearer as it vanished into the blue sky. The people stood, shading their eyes and straining their ears until the vision disappeared into the clouds over the beautiful mountains. King Dolor was never seen or heard of again in his country, but the good he had done lasted for years. He was missed and deeply mourned, but they knew he was on a happy journey. Where he went, or who went with him, no one can say. But I believe his godmother took him to the beautiful mountains on his traveling cloak. What he did there, or where he is now, who can tell? I cannot. But I am sure that, wherever he is perfectly happy. And so, when I think of him, am I?